Texas lawmakers saved Robert Robertson from execution last year, but then the stay on his execution was lifted. And now he's just received a new execution date of October 16th. So today on CityCast Austin, we're revisiting our conversation with an expert on the busiest death chamber in the country to break down this high-profile case from start to finish. And just so y'all know, this interview touches on some difficult topics, so please listen with care. It's Wednesday, August 6th. I'm Nikki Devon, and this is what Austin's talking about. Hello, I'm here today with Michelle Lyons, former public information officer for the Texas Department of Criminal Justice. She has witnessed nearly 300 executions as a reporter or PIO and is also the author of Death Row, The Final Minutes, a memoir. Hi, Michelle. Thank you so much for being here with me.
Hi, Nikki. Thank you so much for having me.
For those of you that don't know, Robert Robertson was set to be executed for the death of his daughter. Is that correct?
Yes, for his 2-year-old daughter.
Then a few members of the Texas House stepped in.
You know, what was certainly unique in this case, and it's the first time I had ever seen that the House had actually issued a subpoena for him to appear and testify before their committee. And so he was supposed to have actually been taken to appear before them and testify, but that never occurred.
So I am going to do a quick case timeline for anyone that's listening, just in case you're not fully aware of what's going on. We're going to start 2001 because this is important. American Academy of Pediatrics publishes a position paper stating that shaken baby syndrome should be presumed with certain symptoms. 2003, Robertson's 2-year-old daughter, Nikki, died. She had been sick. And also in 2003, Robertson is sentenced to death for killing Nikki. The accusal was that she died because of shaken baby syndrome that was initiated by him. That was in 2009, AAP reverses on shaken baby syndrome. 1 week before his first execution date, the Court of Criminal Appeals stayed the execution because of, quote, junk science, essentially calling back to the fact that, we should look at shaken baby syndrome and what we think it is and what it actually is. 2021, 9-day evidentiary hearing in the trial court. 2023, Texas Court of Criminal Appeals decides there was insufficient basis for them to intervene. October of 2023, Supreme Court rejects another appeal. And then August 1st, Robertson's attorney requested that the state district court reopen his case of actual innocence. And they said Nikki died from severe viral and bacterial pneumonia that progressed to sepsis and then septic shock. And there was an execution date of 10/17/2024 that was stayed.
It was stayed after the execution should have already started. So in Texas, they can begin anytime after 6 p.m.
Okay.
At 6 p.m., there were still appeals pending. And so things were moving very fast. The courts were still considering some things. The House had issued a subpoena for him to appear before them. And then 2 of the members of the House had sought a temporary restraining order against the Texas Department of Criminal Justice to block them from carrying out the execution, which I will say I have never seen anything like that. It was absolutely, to me, it was fascinating because it's the first time I know of that, legislators had actually sought a restraining order against this state agency from being able to carry out the execution. It absolutely worked. So they were blocked from being able to carry out the execution. And then the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals upheld that and said you cannot proceed with the execution.
Okay, so wait a minute. So he was subpoenaed, and then on top of the subpoena, I don't know why I'm getting confused.
No, okay. So the House subpoenaed him to come and appear before them.
Okay.
So that he could testify because the House wants to look at this junk science law.
Okay.
And so they subpoenaed him to come and testify about it. But this is where it gets tricky. Who's higher? Where's the
Right.
separation? So is the House subpoena higher, or is the death warrant that this court, the state district
Ah,
court, who wins out? Paxton is arguing no, the execution goes through. And at that point, these two lawmakers went to the court and they sought this restraining order and said, no, TDCJ cannot carry out this execution. There's a subpoena for him to come and appear before us and testify. And so once this higher court said, yes, we'll issue this restraining order and basically block TDC from carrying it out, Paxton still was fighting it.
of
And
course.
yeah, which, the optics of that were not good, because then this is where it just was further complicated and more
Yeah,
complicated,
yeah.
because one of the lawmakers who was seeking this was Jeff Leach. Jeff Leach, of course, was one of the managers leading in the impeachment of Paxton. Paxton has been very vocal about the fact that he has been wanting to retaliate against Leach. So then you have the question, and again, do I know any of
Connecting the
this?
dots.
No, but the optics are not good.
Right.
Is Paxton fighting it because he just feels this strongly that this man should be executed? Or is he fighting it because Jeff Leach is the one who's asking for it not to be carried out? The optics are not good.
And meanwhile,
And
Robert Robertson is in the middle.
yes, there is a human life in the middle
In
of
the
it.
middle.
But Paxton fought it, and the Texas Supreme Court eventually issued a stay that halted it. So at that point, Paxton's fighting the restraining order didn't matter,
Yeah.
because the Texas Supreme Court stepped in and they issued this temporary stay and they said no more. And so that at that point stopped the execution.
And Mr. Robertson, is he going to have to appear in front of the House?
So that's also where Paxton came in. So
Okay.
this all happened on October 17th, the day of the execution. The Texas Supreme Court stepped in and they said, okay, now it is stayed temporarily, cannot proceed tonight. And Robertson was supposed to appear on the 21st, which was a Monday. So the following Monday, he was supposed to appear in person before the House. Paxton cited that it was a security concern for him to appear. And so he blocked that, said that he could not appear in person. The problem is that you have a man who has been on death row for 20 years. He knows nothing about technology.
Right.
There was no Zoom back in 2003. Plus one of the arguments that has been made in his case is that he is autistic. He's got autism. So there are some other issues with why him
Right.
doing this via Zoom, via, any
Right.
type of a tele option is not really going to work.
Right.
But Paxton blocked it. So to my knowledge, he has not yet been able to testify before this committee.
Wow. So now you know what that looks like more than a lot of people do. So can you give us a little bit of a snippet of what is life like for him on death row?
So the men on Texas death row are housed in what's called administrative segregation. So that is, they are housed alone in a solitary cell for 23 hours a day. And then they have 1 hour of solitary recreation. So during that time, they're allowed to either go it's a solitary recreation yard. There's one that's inside, there's one that's outside. But in that time, they are still alone in that area. In their cells, they're really not allowed to have just a whole lot. They, at the time that I was there, were allowed to have at a level 1, which is the best behaved of ADSEG. They were allowed to have a radio. They could have a typewriter. They could subscribe to approved newspapers and magazines. And then, of course, they had their letters and mail from home and family and friends. And then, of course, all of their legal mail. And then if you got to a level 2, and then the worst behaved were at level 3, you were restricted from having almost everything except your legal mail. And at level 3, your time outside of your cell was greatly curtailed, where you were really just having 1 hour of solitary recreation just a couple of times a month.
So, Mr. Robertson has been on death row at this point for decades. He's been in solitary confinement, but that been the entire couple of decades that he's been there? This is what his time has been like?
The crime occurred in 2003, and so he would have been received. Most trials happen within the first year or so after the crime. So yes, he would have been on Texas death row at Polunsky that entire time. Men who were on Texas death row prior to 2000 had spent time at the Ellis unit, and their experience was completely different. They, at the Ellis unit, actually had a work program, and they had two men in a cell, and so they had cellmates, and they were able to go to religious services. So they went to church. They went to a cafeteria. They had meals together. So their experience was totally different. But there was an escape from Texas death row. And at that time, there was a serious incident review that was conducted, and it was determined that because the men on death row were able to move around so freely and spend all this time together, that's how they were able to plan this escape.
Wow.
And so there was a decision that was made that when these men were moved from the Ellis unit to this higher security, this very secure area of this new unit, that they would no longer be allowed to commiserate. They would not be allowed to spend time together, and they would be kept completely in solitary. So yes, because of when he was received by death row, he's never really had any different experience.
So everybody was essentially punished for the escape.
Yes.
Wow.
Yes. Yeah.
I'm really curious because since we're talking about time, so Mr. Robertson was sentenced to death in 2003. Is this normal? Do people normally spend 2 decades on death row? And if so, why? If you've decided that the sentence is death, you've decided that that's the punishment you're going to dole out, then why are you making people stay in these conditions for 20 years? Or is it that there's an appeal process or something that I don't understand or don't know?
There's definitely an appeals process, but it is very much on a case-by-case basis. And I will say that is sort of an unusually long period of time for convictions after 1995. And I say that because in 1995, there was a federal law that was passed that put limits on when certain appeals had to be filed. And so after that, you saw that the time that inmates were spending on death row actually kind of was compressed. There was a shorter span. And so the average at one point had dropped to where most death row inmates that were coming in after 1995 was as little as about 10 years. It was a much shorter span. But, when inmates come on death row, all inmates, no matter what, are given an automatic federal appeal. And in Texas, that tends to happen within the first couple of years, 2 or 3 years. Then after that, they have other appeals that they can pursue. There are some inmates, a handful of inmates, who will just decide, I don't want to pursue any appeals. And we've always referred to them as volunteers. Those are inmates that will say, I don't want anything, give me a date. And so if you go, in fact, you can go on the TDCJ website and you can look, there's a section on death row facts. You will see some inmates who have a really short amount of time on death row because they did exactly that. They said,
wow,
my automatic federal appeal is done. Give me a date. And they've been on 4 or 5 years and they've then been executed. Then you have inmates who were prior to 95 that were on for 30 plus years. The 20 years is a little bit unusual, but this is a very unusual case.
This seems like a lot of cooks in the kitchen for what I'm guessing, or, until this moment, I thought, okay, someone is sentenced to death and then that is followed through and then that is the end of it. Like there just seems to be a lot of people that are able to step in and affect this man's life or death or whatever. Texas lawmakers have been pro-death penalty for a long time, but do you think that this is going to affect how we look at the death penalty?
What's interesting is that in his case, in this particular case, it's not just a small contingent of people who are asking for him to get a new trial. There are more than 80 bipartisan lawmakers who are asking,
Wow.
and that's huge. And I also
Yeah.
don't know of another case where that's occurred. There have been other cases, including cases where I have witnessed the execution, where there have been lawmakers who have urged the governor or the parole board to consider clemency, but
Right.
not 80 bipartisan lawmakers in our
Right.
state.
Okay.
And what's so confusing to me, and again, do I know if this man is guilty or innocent? No, I don't. I don't take a position on that. I don't know. But what I find confusing is that in the absence of definitive guilt, or there's not definitive proof, because what was used, this case hinged on the shaken baby diagnosis,
Right.
is that in the same month that this execution was scheduled, another man in Dallas County who had been convicted on a shaken baby diagnosis under the same medical examiner, his case was thrown out.
What?
Yes, by the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals. That man had gotten a 35-year sentence.
Holy shit.
So the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals has a precedent for throwing this type of case out. And they've done so. They did so in the same month, a week before this execution. So why are they not doing it in this case? If they did it in a
Right.
case for a man who had a 35-year sentence, why are they not doing it, looking at it in a death penalty case? That's the
Right.
part I don't understand. If the position I have always taken on the death penalty is this: whether you're for it or against it, you should want to be absolutely certain that the person that you have sentenced to death
Exactly.
has committed this crime. If you can't say that here, then this person needs a new trial. And
Right.
and that's where, to me, I'm very confused. I don't understand the discrepancy here
Right.
when this has just happened with the Court of Criminal Appeals. This has already been done a week before.
You are blowing my mind right now. The death penalty always seems incredibly political to me. But, we also have like thousands and thousands of new Texans and Austinites who may be surprised to hear about this. You know what I mean? That may be surprised to hear about Texas, like how things really get down in Texas. What are some things that we need to know about Texas when it comes to the death penalty?
In Texas, obviously, you're eligible for the death penalty if you have committed capital murder. And capital murder is murder in commission of another felony. So it is not just you have killed somebody. It is you have raped and killed someone. You have kidnapped and murdered someone. You have robbed and killed someone.
Oh, okay.
But there are some exceptions. So it is considered capital murder if you kill a police officer, if you kill a fireman, if you kill a child under the age of 6. So there are some murders that are automatically considered capital offenses.
Okay.
So it is supposed to be by statute reserved for the absolute worst crimes.
Okay.
That's why in his case it was considered capital murder, because it was a child under the age of 6. It is sometimes hard to explain, how one case receives the death penalty and another doesn't, because you can look at the circumstances of a case in one county, and then in another county, a very similar case doesn't. But then that's where you have to examine the county and the way that they decide to prosecute crimes. It is very expensive to try a death penalty case. One of the things I used to get all of the time when I was at the prison system is, questions about, why should we, sentence this person to life in prison when that's so much more expensive and stuff. And that was absolutely untrue. It is very expensive. It is much more expensive to
Right.
sentence someone to death, because even though they are only on death row, let's say for the 10 years or for a short amount of time, when you consider their appeals process, most times they are sentenced to death with a court-appointed lawyer, and all of their appeals are court-appointed. And these appeals are being argued before often the Supreme Court and at these federal levels and stuff. So those costs add up, and sometimes are in
Mhm.
the millions of dollars, as opposed to if you're just in the general population for the rest of your life and it costs $40 a day to house you.
Wow.
It's really expensive to execute somebody.
But that actually is a really good segue because I'm curious, what is it like for you to be the spokesperson for TDCJ on executions? Like 300 executions, that's a lot. How do you prepare for that? And over the course of seeing all these executions, what have you learned?
When I first took that job, I knew that witnessing executions was a part of it, but it was a small part of the job as far as time goes. You know, because there might be in a year 17 executions, and how many days are there in a year? So it wasn't that it took up that much time. It's just that as far as the job goes, it's the most taxing thing you do because you are going in, you're watching someone die. And I think at the very beginning, I was very good about compartmentalizing it. And, this is my job. And I go in and I'm taking the reporters in. That was what my role was. I would take the reporters in to witness the execution. I would
Wow.
help them afterwards. I would answer questions. If there were media that couldn't witness because we only had 5 spots to witness, I would assist those reporters. That was it. But what I've talked about extensively or I've written about is the fact that I have a child and I gave birth in 2005. And that's when I think things got a lot more complex for me because it was always easy to empathize with the victim's family because, here they've had this horrible loss. And so they come
Right.
in. And I always empathized with the inmate's family, but it was different after I became a parent because I would see this inmate's mother, and I would watch her watching her child die in front of her, and it would tear me up
Oh my
because
God.
no matter what,
Right.
that's her son.
Ooh.
I don't even know how you do that, and so that started really messing with me. And then there would be cases that I would watch where it would inevitably be someone I knew they committed the crime, or the inmate would be very forthcoming about the fact that they committed the crime.
Right.
But I would feel really a lot empathetic about it. I would feel, I would be rooting for the inmate. I would be hoping they got to stay. And then I would feel really guilty for feeling that way because I would think, well, yeah, that's easy for you to say. They didn't, take from you. They didn't harm
Right.
you. This wasn't
Right.
your family member. I'd feel guilty. So it ended up towards the end when I left in 2012. I just felt guilty all the time. I felt guilty for rooting for this inmate. It was just guilt all the time. And I would say, as far as what I think I learned, I walked away. I was much more public safety minded, much more safety minded. And I don't see how you can't be. When you do
Right.
a job like that, you see the worst of what people do to one another. But also, I came away seeing there are aspects of it that just also aren't fair, and things that
Right.
need to be changed.
I'm glad that you brought us back around to that because I kind of have had this feeling about the death penalty for a really long time. You've taken someone else's life, so that means we have to take your life. I mean, it's a very simplified way to say it, but essentially at its root is what it feels like to me. You've
Hmm.
killed someone, so now we have to kill you. That's what it is, right? It makes no sense to me that we would not be like, oh, there wouldn't be pause, like, oh shit, so there is a chance that we were wrong about this. Maybe we should make absolutely sure.
Yeah.
So it's like, because that's not what's happening right now, this feels very political. It feels like it's something that's so much bigger than this basic idea that, like, this is your punishment for doing this thing. Am I overreaching?
No, unfortunately, no, because sadly, I think that people are inherently selfish. I think that it really came down to voting for me versus voting for we.
Right. And so so are you saying you think that, like, maybe what we're seeing with the Ken Paxtons and the other people pushing this kind of really, really strict death penalty stuff in Texas is just that? It's like, I'm voting for me. I'm voting for what I think is right. And I am making these decisions for an entire entire state based on what I think is right. And I think that this is what it is. All of the information that we have, be damned. I think this is wrong. I've decided that he is guilty, and so he is.
Yes, I think that that's
Yeah.
probably the case because, I mean,
Yeah.
in the face of some of the evidence, like to be honest, I was shocked when Paxton was reelected. Well, he was under indictment in the first place.
Listen.
It was some of it's surprising. It always shocks me when somebody claims that they're law and order and they are all for, law and order and back the blue and all of that. And then you can elect somebody who is under indictment or
Right.
You are absolutely the definition of hypocrisy at that point.
Right. And so what would have to change in the state for us to change these laws?
There's been one significant change. I will say that life without parole was introduced, and that really did change the game.
Right.
So prior to that, if somebody was convicted of capital murder, there were really just there was the option was pretty much death or you got life. But prior to life without parole, when you got life, what it really meant was it on paper it was 99 years. But because there was no life without parole, 99 years meant you served 45 years and then you were eligible for parole. And so let's say that you convict a 20-year-old of capital murder. A jury saw that and they said, I don't like that at 65 he could be eligible for parole. I don't want that. So we just have to give him death. When life without parole was introduced, it had a really significant impact on Texas death row because back when I was really in the middle of my career with the Texas Department of Criminal Justice, there were over 400 men on Texas death row. And if you look today, that number has been halved. People are just not coming on to death row because the counties are not seeking the death penalty as much. They don't have to because life without parole exists. Yeah. So, juries, I think they're not... They have that option. And so whereas they maybe weren't comfortable with the idea that the person would someday get out, they don't have to sentence them to death. In my mind, one of the biggest issues with the death penalty is just the hoops that you have to jump through, whether it's DNA testing, whether or not it's retesting of evidence in a trial.
Right.
I don't think that, having to request of a court that you have DNA test, of this evidence or, have this retest. I don't think that having to ask a court so then they can deny you or wait for 3 years for them to then deny you. That makes zero sense to me because again, I come back to whether you support it or don't, you should want to know for sure that person committed the crime.
Right.
So I think at the very least, there needs to be some reform there. It should be something because science is advancing and changing all of the time. And, people need to have access to it so that you can confirm it.
I am saying this as someone who, both have lost people. I've said there's been a fair amount of violence in my life. So I've definitely lost people to violence. I've definitely lost people to just like things that make you question the human, whatever. And so I say that, and I say this with eyes open and with an understanding of violence. I a very, very, very clear understanding. And also, the death penalty seems, without reform, like this archaic tradition this archaic thing that we've just done for so long that we don't know anything else. It's like everything is advancing and we are not advancing in this way. Science gets better. It just stands to reason that, especially if you're going to have people on death row for years anyway, if you're going to have people on death row for 10, 20, 4, 5 years even, then you should at least be willing to hear and learn and talk about the possibility that maybe what you thought was possible 20 years ago is not possible anymore. Or maybe things have changed. And the fact that we aren't doing that in this case is terrifying.
And that's exactly it. There are cases that I do not have an issue with at all. I remember there was an inmate on death row who freely admitted what he did. And he told me the story of what he did and was so calm about it. Told me about how he had gone to, it was a coworker's house, and he killed the coworker. The coworker had a toddler. He drowned the toddler in the coworker's
What
kitchen sink,
the
and then
fuck?
he told me the story in the most matter-of-fact way and stuff. There was no question about the guilt.
Right.
I have no question about the execution.
Right.
It's a
Right.
very
Right.
matter-of-fact case and stuff. That's not what we have here.
Right. Personally, do you see a future where Texas will change the use or reform or adjust their use of the death penalty? Do you see that? Do you see a future in that happening at all?
Unfortunately, I think the only way that would happen is if they executed an innocent person. But nobody wants that to happen for them to do that.
Right. Right.
But unfortunately, that's what it would take for them to really finally do that.
And that is so real. That is so real. Michelle, thank you for being here. I really appreciate you explaining this to me, because the death penalty is something that I am always kind of grappling with, if I'm being honest. Thank you for coming on and talking to me about this and kind of backtracking it with me and explaining it to me like I'm a second grader, because that's what I need.
Yes.
So I'm really
appreciative. Not at all.
appreciative.
Thank you so much.
Before we go, we want to do a quick neighborhood shout out from our CityCast Austin neighbor, Jessica L. Jessica wants to shout out Dog Day Coffee. She says it's a very dog-friendly coffee shop run by an Epoch veteran that has delicious nitro coffees. What's not to love? You know what, Jessica? I'm going to find out. Thank you for letting us know about Dog Day Coffee. And if you're listening and you're a neighbor and you want to let us know about your favorite restaurant or your favorite business, don't forget, we're going to be doing this regularly. So you have opportunity after opportunity. And you know what? If you're listening and you're not a neighbor and you want to become one, go to membership.citycast.fm and you will get this perk, other great perks, a tote bag, all kinds of stuff. So check us out. Become a neighbor today. And one more thing before we go. Here's a little midweek mood boost for you. The community came together to repaint the front of Life in the City Church after it was vandalized a few days ago. Someone spray painted a homophobic message and tore apart the pride flag that was hanging in front of the church. In response, the church put out a call to the community to help get a new paint job. And now it looks amazing. The front of the church now includes all the colors of the pride flag, as well as the words faith, hope, and love. It's really, really beautiful, y'all. So shout out to this church for meeting hate with grace and resilience. That's all for today here on CityCast Austin. You can find links to Michelle's social media and book in our show notes. If you enjoyed the show, why not tell a friend, rate the show, leave us a review, and subscribe to our Hey Austin newsletter. And don't forget, you can support the show and get some great perks by becoming a CityCast Austin member at membership.citycast.fm. We'll be back tomorrow morning with more news from around the city. Bye, y'all.